Hello, my name is Kevin Probst, and I'm coming to you from Kevin's Corner on this 11th day of November in 2024. And today I would like to address replacement theology. So let's take a hard look at replacement theology. Those who believe in replacement theology would infer that Israel is no longer relevant to the sovereign plan of God because the church, the body of believers, has replaced Israel. They teach the many promises of God made to the nation of Israel have now been transferred to the church. And those who reject replacement theology believe that the church and Israel have separate identities and one does not replace the other. The argument regarding replacement theology often devolves into accusations of anti-Semitism. I don't want to go there. Let's avoid that discussion and focus on what the scriptures say regarding God's plan for Israel. Paul addresses the Romans regarding God's future plans. In Romans 11:24, he says, "For if you were cut out of the olive tree, which is wild by nature, and were grafted contrary to nature into a cultivated olive tree, how much more will these, who are natural branches, be grafted into their own olive tree?" The olive tree represents Israel and all the promises God made to them. If obedient Gentiles, non-Jewish Christians, can be grafted into the olive tree and become recipients of God's promise of salvation through Christ Jesus, how much more might a Jew who converts to Christ be grafted back into the tree as a natural branch? Paul is saying that it is not impossible or more difficult for the Jewish people to convert to Christ. It is a very natural thing for them to do. The commentator Morris had this to say: evidently, some Gentile believers were tempted to think that there was no future for Israel. She had rejected the gospel, and it had now passed to the Gentiles. Israel was finished, rejected, cast off. God had chosen them instead. It is this kind of pride that Paul is opposing. End quote. Romans 11:25, "For I do not desire, brethren, that you should be ignorant of this mystery, lest you should be wise in your own opinion, that blindness in part has happened to Israel, until the fullness of the Gentiles has come." Paul concludes his teaching on Israel by indicating that their blindness would one day be lifted. And the blindness that he refers to here is their refusal to accept Christ as their Messiah. And he warns the Gentiles, don't get puffed up about your salvation, about the time when they are being sought for salvation. When that time is complete, when the fullness of the Gentiles is come, the focus will revert to the Jewish people. When the blindness is lifted, they will no longer reject Christ. At some time in the future, a large number of Jewish people will seek after Christ. And we should all delight and rejoice in the hope that a great gospel revival will happen among the Jewish people. But let's back up to Romans chapter 11, verses 11 and 12. "I say then, have they stumbled that they should fall? Certainly not. But through their fall, to provoke them to jealousy, salvation has come to the Gentiles. Now, if their fall is riches for the world, and their failure riches for the Gentiles, how much more their fullness?" So the salvation enjoyed by the Gentiles will provoke the Jewish people to jealousy. They will hunger to experience what the Gentiles have received. Just as their failure, the fact that they rejected the Messiah, created an opportunity for the Gentiles, that opportunity will also be offered to them. How very blessed they will be when they also experience his fullness. Romans 11:25 speaks of the blindness that has happened to Israel. Romans 11:26, that next verse, speaks of all Israel being saved. Now, those who would say that Israel in verse 26 is referring to the church cannot also believe that the Israel in verse 25 is referring to the church. All the church cannot be saved as blindness is happening to the church. It appears clearly that Paul is contrasting two people groups, the Jews and the Gentiles. At some point in time, Romans 11:26, he will turn away all ungodliness from Jacob, the nation of Israel. And in Romans 11:27, for this is my covenant with them when I take away their sins. Paul is reflecting on the prophecy of Isaiah 59:20 regarding a great revival, a turning from their rejection of the Messiah to an overwhelming acceptance of him. The Redeemer will come to Zion and to those who turn from transgression in Jacob. If Israel is being replaced by the church, let us consider Romans 11:28. Concerning the gospel, they are enemies for your sake, but concerning the election, they are beloved for the sake of the fathers. Now, this verse is certainly not suggesting that the church is the enemy. It clearly points to the unsaved Jewish people who have rejected their Messiah. However, God has not ceased loving the nation that he has chosen in spite of their sin. The word election in verse 28 cannot be married to the doctrine of election. Election in this verse is simply the choosing of a nation, a large group of people, to accomplish a purpose of some kind. God's hand is upon them to get them through the hard times because there is yet a glorious future awaiting them. They are beloved for the sake of their fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The intent to elect or choose Israel was revealed to the early Jewish fathers and their descendants, and was first issued to Abraham in Genesis chapter 17, verses 7 and 8. And I will establish my covenant between me and you and your descendants after you and their generations for an everlasting covenant, to be God to you and your descendants after you. Also, I give to you and your descendants after you the land in which you are a stranger, all the land of Canaan, as an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. The land of promise was to be their everlasting possession. Let's return to Romans 11, verse 29. For the gifts and the calling of God are irrevocable. God cannot lie. He cannot be unfaithful to his vows. He makes to his chosen people. Imagine how insecure and unstable we would be in our relationship with him if we had to doubt his promises to us. His promises are sure to us, to the nation of Israel, to the Christians who obey him and follow him. Romans 11:30, just as you who were at one time disobedient to God have now received mercy as a result of their disobedience. This verse says that because you, the Jewish people, have disobeyed, the target of the gospel message has been the Gentiles, and they have profited greatly from your disobedience. Romans 11:31 follows and says, so they too have now become disobedient in order that they too may now receive mercy as a result of God's mercy to you. Paul is warning the Gentiles, again, not to be proudful regarding their own salvation. Remember where you came from and be grateful for the grace that was bestowed upon you. The Gentile Christians were lifted out of their disobedience by the grace of God. The mercy extended to them was, in part, a result of the disobedience of Israel. Just as God has shown mercy to the Gentiles, he can also show mercy to the Jews. Both unrepentant Jews and Gentiles are in bondage to their sin, and both groups can be freed from their bondage through the sacrifice of the Son. Romans 11:32, for God has bound everyone over to disobedience so that he may have mercy on them all. The Jews are no more deserving of the land than they are of salvation. However, God has promised to them a land they do not deserve, and a salvation that can be experienced only through his provision of grace and mercy. Thank you so much. If you are interested in these kind of videos and the topic of theology, replacement theology. Please tune in again and follow me at Kevin's Corner, and I appreciate the time that you've given today. Have a great day.